Okay, today we have here Matthew Ehret, which is an author, journalist, and then director of the Canadian Patriot Review and the Rise Tide Foundation. He is also collaborated with Washington Times, Strategic Culture, Zero Edge, The Duran, The Cradle, among others. And he has a very interesting work about many different topics around politics, geopolitics, and especially now he is doing a series of short movies about conspiracy theories or conspiracy facts. Hi, Matthew. Good morning. It's morning there. He's in Canada, in Toronto. Good
Yeah.
morning, Matthew.
Good
May you
morning,
first.
Ricardo. Yes, thank you for having me on and talking about this topic, which is very close to my heart. And indeed, also the new video series that is coming out is being done with my wife Cynthia Chung and a very talented filmmaker who I've been collaborating with now for a little while, named Jason Dahl, who runs a studio in Ottawa. And I had been looking for a long time, for years, to find somebody with the quality of talent that Jason Dahl has, in order to produce some actual higher end multimedia productions. And so I got demoralized. I couldn't find anybody who had both talent, skill, as well as knowledge of history and a sensitivity to conspiracies as they are in reality. And so when I met Jason, we began producing. We agreed to produce a series of videos, big and small, with the first one that you've already seen. So
Yeah, I've seen the first chapter, the one about domestic terrorism.
yeah,
Can you explain a little bit for our public? Our public is mainly Portuguese speaking from Brazil and Portugal, and a little bit of Portuguese Africa, and but they are very interested. And of course, now that this content will be in English, you are free to explain a little bit more from this terrorism. What is domestic terrorism concept? They brought up this year or late last year as this new administration in the United States came to into power. And what is the end? What is the goal of these guys to now name individuals as terrorists when we are talking about mainly opinions? Yeah.
yeah. Well, I what you have right now is a setting of a stage for a show. The show, of course, is a being shaped by the breakdown of the entire transatlantic financial system. And it's not just the financial system, which is a bubble. It is a time bomb sitting upon unpayable debts, but it's not just that. It's the entire social fabric, which is going to, if we do not get some remedies, we're going to have the general social fabric breakdown in many ways. It's not just the supply chains. It's not just the defaults of the unpayable debts, which will result in a chain reaction deleveraging of the system. It's also mixed in with money printing for decades. Since 2008, we've had printing of trillions of dollars out of thin air to keep a bunch of banks in Europe and North America from collapsing. So we have all of these things that are going to break down unless nation states act in a moral, scientific way to protect the citizens of the transatlantic, which is possible, but right now it's not likely because unfortunately most of those governments, of Europe, of North America, of the rules-based international order, are captured. They're captured by forces that did not happen overnight. It happened over many decades since World War II. And this capturing by this, what you might consider a supranational, above nation states agency, which has um, a coordinated uh, set of powers of fifth columns nested within a variety of countries. Sometimes we call this deep state, if you know that's a new term that's been used. They have set the stage for essentially erasing certain traditions that arose after the the Florentine Renaissance that spread all across Europe in the 15th century. There are certain traditions, certain ideas that awoke within humankind, which had never been seen before, that they want to erase. And so, what they're trying to do is create a cataclysm, a crisis, um, which they want to then use as an opportunity to restore, in a sense, a new type of feudalism, a type of dark age type of feudalism. And all of the voices of people who would normally oppose this type of immoral regression into the past, an idea of global enslavement, which was a feudal idea where everyone lived like talking cows under the estate of an overlord, who was part of a hereditary class. Anyone who would normally oppose this, they want to label domestic terrorist. That's their way of trying to do an Orwellian illegalization of bad thinking, which is incongruent with the aims and objectives of this restoration of feudalism. So the term domestic terrorist has been sort of used. On the one hand, it's been loosely defined so that even people who increasingly simply engage in loosely defined terms like hate against what, right? Is it just hate against other races, or is it also hate against classes? Is it hate against corporations? Like what is this hate thing that you're saying is a precursor, a symptom of domestic terrorists if you
Mhm.
promote that? It's very loosely defined. The other thing that I've gotten across in my books and in my recent writings is that when you actually look at all of the cases of terrorism, foreign and domestic, over the past 50 years, there's very few examples you can find which does not have the hand of coordinating intelligence agencies, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in North America. You will tend to find that there is no such thing as naturally occurring terrorism or terrorist movements. Every time you look, you tend to find the CIA, the FBI, MI6, German intelligence, which, keep in mind, was run for many years by Reinhard Gehlen, Hitler's head of Nazi intelligence, was installed in Western German intelligence for about 2 decades by Allen Dulles after World War II, with his
Mhm.
entire Nazi network, right? These
Yeah,
are the
that has a lot to do for sure with stay behinds, cell and
yeah.
all these that here in Germany was very important, but in Italy also. And
Mm,
this is well, what you're telling is that these terrorist groups back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even they were not grassrooted, so there was something controlled from different so intelligence and this deep state, this network you had talked before. Yes, and this is the problem about this theory, conspiracy theories. And then when after some decades, like 20, 30 years, we know and we have studies and testimonies that it really happened. Now this is a conspiracy because it is still a conspiracy, but it's a fact, it's not a theory.
no, exactly.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. If it's provable, it's a fact. It's no longer just a smoky thing floating in the air as a maybe. You can prove, and it was admitted even by leading coordinators of Operation Gladio, people who
Glad you know.
participated directly in it, that indeed there was a secret army that was maintained. From the moment World War II was declared over, there was an immediate operation to reincorporate many of the worst elements of the fascist machine into Western intelligence operations, both in Italy, Germany, as you said, and beyond. And this spread, there was not one single country in Europe that was not affected by this operation, including also countries like Canada and the USA that had their own um, problems. Let's just say that. Um, and the entire idea was that everything was justified in the war against communism. And as long as communism was elevated to be the global boogeyman, the biggest threat to world civilization beyond everything else. Every other evil, whether it was assassinations, coup d'etats, even terrorist activity deployed against innocent populations of Europe or of America, like we saw with the Weather Underground or in the FLQ crisis in Quebec throughout the 1960s, where people had bombs placed in innocent people in their mailboxes as part of a way of affecting the zeitgeist, the entire the spirit of the people of the times that could not think creatively, could not think with reason if they were charged with fear of, shadowy terrorist cells that want to kill them just because they hate your freedom, run by, obviously these were typically Maoist, Leninist, Marxist organizations in their shell, whether it was the Red Army faction in Europe or whether it was the FLQ, the Front de Libération de Québec, or there's so many different variants. They always had sort of a communist veneer, but again, when you actually look at the mountains of data that has been presented through declassified information, people who were on the inside over the years, I would recommend people watch Alan Frankovich's BBC documentary from 1992 on Gladio. They can even
Yes, I know that one.
yeah, it's a
It's a,
very good
a
documentary.
good, very good. Well done. Yeah.
Yeah, if people have any doubts, I mean, there's a 2-hour documentary. You could still
Yes.
access it for now. It completely demonstrates scientifically why this happened, and ultimately why those forces. I mean, what's left untouched, but I think is important, is why is it that the forces that funded the growth of Nazism, the growth of corporate fascism in Italy in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and I'm talking about the Wall Street, the City of London banks, the industrialists of J.P. Morgan's networks, Prescott Bush, the Bush family patriarch, the Rockefeller Standard Oil, which was providing petroleum supplies to the Nazi machine all the way up until 1945. There would have been no Operation Barbarossa had Standard Oil not have supplied the petroleum requirements that was used by the Nazis. So many, they were never punished. The intelligence agencies that people like Alan Dulles, John Foster Dulles, organized, they were always complicit and working very closely with Nazis in the 1930s and 40s even. And so why
Yeah.
were they never punished in Nuremberg? They never went away. They still
Yeah.
remain there. Yeah.
Yeah, but I remember, but to have a starting point where to understand, because for our
Mm.
generation also, and
Mm.
the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, where the JFK and then the wars on the Middle East and the gold pattern to the dollar. That's where it starts, at least in the economic part
Yeah.
of the things. And I
Yeah.
remember translating one of your articles, what I will put here down below for the people who want to read it in Portuguese. You talk about the coup d'etat against, well, when the assassination of JFK. That's where you put, like,
Mhm.
that was done from some reason from powerful people to start a new paradigm on the United States and the economy, the worldwide economy. Can you? And this is a conspiracy, and it is a fact. Can you explain for once and for everyone that understands that these things happen not by chance, but with
Mhm.
intent? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people tend to become a little obsessed about the details, the minutia of who did it, right? How many shooters were there? How located where? And obviously, even from the Zapruder film, it's very clear that, and this film was kept secret for several years. And it was only Jim Garrison, a district attorney of New Orleans in 1967, who forced this to go public. That demonstrated very clearly that the killing shot arose not from the back but from the front, where you could clearly see JFK's head go backwards, and his wife went and tried to capture a piece of
Mm.
skull or whatever brain tissue on the back of the car. It's a very painful scene to watch. But again, most people don't know that this was kept secret. And the only version of the Zapruder film that anyone had access to had been rearranged for 5 years, from 1963 until 67, 68. Um, the clips had been rearranged to play in reverse so that it appeared that his head would go forward. Um, and hardly anyone had even seen that. So who was that, just a mistake that had maintained itself for that period of time, or was there an effort to try to keep certain evidence secret? And there's obviously a lot more evidence than this. But I think the thing that's most important, which I try to do in my writings, is to look more at, well, what was JFK doing? Oh, what would whose power structures was he threatening, rather than getting caught in the name of this CIA contractor or this CIA contractor or this person that tied to the French OAS, which was actually
Okay.
part of the thing that was trying to kill de Gaulle too. Um, Rather than which had operatives on the ground in Dallas, Texas, by the way, or the mafia, right? Rather than getting caught into all of that, look first and foremost at, well, what were JFK's policies? What was he trying to do? What did he do successfully? What was he attempting to do that he was not able to finish? And which power structures was he challenging? Who would have lost power in terms of the international? Um, I mean, just look at the role of the international Wall Street operatives or their London counterparts that were working very hard to have certain objectives maintained. So when JFK began to revive the Franklin Roosevelt policy of a 1960s updated version of the New Deal, which was what Franklin Roosevelt had done earlier in the 1930s as part of a multifaceted war on the power structures of Wall Street, which, I mean, I think everyone knows FDR broke up the banks, forced hundreds of bankers to go to jail. He sabotaged a London bankers conference to create a bankers dictatorship in 1933. He did many things, but on a positive side, what he did is he forced the behavior of the banks and of credit to serve for the building of large scale infrastructure, which was in the interests of the each individual, but of the nation as a whole. And that was the New Deal. Thousands and thousands of projects, big and small, that began a healing process after 4 years of self-induced depression, right, of the 1929. So this created a sort of template of what was possible, what was constitutionally possible for every president into the future. And JFK was very inspired by that. He was very much organized by people like Eleanor Roosevelt, by General de Gaulle, to understand. He had a better understanding of the nature of the enemies of Allen Dulles, who he fired from the post of the CIA director, along with
Mhm.
Deputy Director Cabell, when the time came right. He understood the nature of the deep state that had set itself like a fifth column with serpents all around him. There was very few people he could trust. There were a few, his brother being one of them, but not very many. And he made it very clear in his speeches that he wanted to revive that better spirit of the Democratic Party that was last seen with Franklin Roosevelt. The Democratic Party was overall being taken over by this parasite, this London-directed fifth column that had operated specifically through the Council on Foreign Relations, which was sort of the set up in 1921 as the American branch of the British Roundtable movement, called the Royal Institute for International Affairs. People like Allen Dulles was a leader of this, so was Henry Kissinger. And this is the British hand inside of America as part of the inner takeover from within. And it coordinated many activities within the United States. So uh, John Kennedy understood this quite well. He tried to do a variety of things, and he did, like I said, some very, very strongly. The a mission of his program for breaking the Cold War by calling out his Russian counterparts and making a demand for, or a proposition for, a joint U.S. Russian space program that was supposed to be both the U.S. and Russian together landing on the moon within the decade, as he'd hoped. but doing this in a way that would create grounds for common trust. The That was very important. That would have erased the Cold War, the entire mutually assured destruction formula. The looking over to Africa, South America, JFK had many contacts, and he worked with the business community as well to break the control of things like J.P. Morgan's steel interests, U.S. Steel, and instead go for a pro-industrial policy with for both the development and industrialization of South America, but also of Africa. So the building of the Volta River Dam in Ghana was built through an initiative by John Kennedy, which to this very day has a plaque in honor of his name. The idea was to create full spectrum economies in all of the countries that were targeted for recolonization by the IMF, the World Bank. JFK had instead the idea that no, we have to help them stand on their own 2 feet. There were many other things he did as far as coordinating a national policy for water management of the continent. He built the most dams in I think U.S. history was initiated under John F. Kennedy's period. That would, if these things had continued, especially on the West Coast, with water diversion projects that he was looking at with his colleagues in Canada and British Columbia, you easily would have had a continental water project, which today, if it had not been sabotaged, would have made the fires and droughts and famine-like conditions arising in
Yeah.
California impossible. Things
Hmm.
like NWAPA were coming out of this process, the North American Water and Power Line. So overall, what he was doing is he was unleashing a spirit of optimism and a spirit of no limits, that human beings do not have to suffer the fate of animals, which always have limits to their growth potential based upon their physical constraints of their environment and their genetics. That's animals. Human beings, when we operate according to natural law, John F. Kennedy understood and demonstrated that we don't have those same limits. We can leap beyond them by encouraging new discoveries and inventions that then translate back into new technologies and new resources that did not exist while we were ignorant of those resources. And so his investments into nuclear power, fusion energy, fusion propulsion for space exploration, which he saw as far beyond the moon, but rather something that would go to the ends of the solar system. And he says so in many of his speeches, as well as liberating the people of the colonized world, and taking back national power from the private bankers. These were all things that he was doing. And some of them, like I said, succeeded more than the oligarchy believed that they should have. And when he was killed, you had a complete takeover, and the U.S. lost its soul for a long time.
And that was the beginning of the coup that then lead to the neoliberalism in 70s, 80s. And but who do you think really pulled the strings behind this? You two talked about the CFR, the round table from the Britons, and how who are they? I mean, this network is not only Democrats, it's not
Yeah.
only Republicans, not only Americans, Europeans. It's a worldwide thing. I mean,
Yeah.
and mm, wha- wha- so I see it very often about when they talk about this that the British oligarchy still have their interests in the United States, and they dominate the international policy. But I don't know. It is different. It is difficult to believe that a country like Britain,
Yeah.
even that is the center of the capitalism. That I understand clearly that
Yeah.
the London, the city of London, has more influence because historically that where it began, and it has a very and there it goes to the conspiracy thing, because even the JFK talked about the secrecy, this is
Yeah,
very
secret
very
societies.
perverse, very perverse conception of the politics, when something that is not clear, not open to the population. And that is very how the Britons work. But uh, sometimes even I wrote an article about this Ukrainian thing, and I said that they are doing, and I was talking about NATO. They are using the pawns that are the Ukrainians, maybe the bishop and the knights are like the countries around, like Poland, and at the end the rooks are Germany and France. And at the end, I ask, but at the end, who is the king and the queen? So,
Mhm.
who is the king and the queen? Talking
Yeah,
about geopolitics, normal
yeah, yeah,
between
yeah,
countries,
yeah,
nation states,
yeah.
United States and Great Britain. Who is the
Who,
one? What is the other? Because in chess, actually, the queen is more valuable. I mean, has more power, but the most valuable is
who's the king? Yeah,
is the king. I mean,
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
so this kind
yeah.
of thing. What is the role of the Britons? How deep are these alliance between the United States and Great Britain? And what are the role? What is the role of the Europeans in the middle of all these things?
Yeah. Well, yeah, who leads in the dance? I think that what is useful when looking at history, and that obviously is needed to look and understand our current events and where we're going into the future, is to recognize that power isn't the greatest power in the geopolitical great game of sorts is never in the physical component of things. Like, quick example, obvious example, Great Britain, tiny island, for 1750 until 1946, maintained the biggest global empire. Tiny little island. Sun never sets, right? 22% of the world's surface area was subdued and controlled by the British directly under the British Empire, and much more of it was controlled indirectly through the creation of organized crime networks that were maintained and were beholden never to their national interests, but always to the foreign agency of who controls the money, who controls the for example, the city of London. It's not a new thing that they're the center, a center nerve center of the world finance. This goes back a long time. The city of London is a very old institution, and it has been the center of world finance for hundreds of years. So how were they able to control 400 million Indians for 200 years? How were they able to do that when they only had at most maybe 12, 13,000 soldiers physically on the ground, right? That doesn't make sense. And so it's only when you begin to realize, okay, it's a much more multifaceted component. You have intelligence, you have cultural warfare, which is something reserved for the elite as far as a knowledge, a science of cultural warfare. This is not something you learn in community college. This is something that it's reserved for a very select batch of young people who are perhaps of the right family, who have the right inclinations, who are selected, they're discovered, they're provided sometimes Rhodes scholarships as part of their their process of reaching upper level management position, or let's just say that.
Hmm.
And in the course of doing that, a set of experiences is provided to those young people who go through an Oxford or another. There's a variety of these types of scholarships that are provided, who then are brought into a sense of an understanding of the longer waves of history and how history actually moves versus how we're taught in popular books you can buy at your local bookstore, um, which involves controlling the way people are thinking, controlling the way they're feeling,
You're
right?
talking about Tavi Vostok. What is the name of this
Tavistock.
institute?
Yeah, that's one
Tavistock.
aspect.
Tavistock. Yeah.
It's the psychological warfare component of the British
That
Empire.
is the main one for this kind of operation.
That's
Yeah.
the main artery. Yeah, there's also other aspects of it too. There is cultural wars that also involve approaches to science. What method will be permitted in the scientific world, what sorts of theories are going to receive money, financial support, publications in peer-reviewed journals, and which approaches to science are going to be crushed, choked of funding. There's things like that. There's also artistic aspects too. What sorts
Yeah.
of artistic traditions will be provided money, revenue to grow, and which ones will be choked off, right? Why are we producing no more Beethovens or Mozarts or Schuberts today? Why is that?
I don't even know the names of the guys today. When I look at the mainstream music, it's so it's insulting, and even the style and the values they transmit to the youngsters. I mean, with there's a lot of now the propaganda of the drug normally that in my times would be forbidden. Now is very
Yeah,
is normal and makes
yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
it's scary.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's kind of like this question of terrorism, foreign and domestic. Are these naturally occurring phenomenon, or are they artificially created to induce a certain effect in a target society you want to control through fear and through other things, confusion? And it's the same sort of thing with abstract art, atonalist music, scientific theories that are useless. We discovered the God particle 10 years ago. What changed? Nothing. After like decades of searching, we're like, oh, we found it. Here's the God particle. We poured billions of dollars into building bigger and bigger particle accelerators. And finally, they say, here it is. We discovered this thing because we smashed two particles up. They exploded in a certain way. We found a certain trajectory from some of the subparticles, and some of them matched the sort of calculations we expected we would receive by finding this God particle, which would somehow, we were told, explain the causes of coherence. Why is there mass? Why do things fit together? Because in the standard theory of quantum mechanics, which we are given as the sort of standard norm that everyone has to adopt to, you can't fit gravity into the equations of the four fundamental forces of electromagnetic strong and weak nuclear forces. Gravity cannot be made to fit, and so they can't explain why is there coherence in reality in space-time. And so they were trying to smash things together to find this mystical thing that they said must exist called the God particle that just allows for the explanation of coherence. And then they say they did it, and again, like I said, nothing really changed. Is that a real scientific discovery if you make a discovery and then nothing changes? No, not at all. A scientific discovery comes with it a power of action, of having an ability to make better discoveries, but also live a better life, to translate those discoveries into new ways of having better technologies, of having more power to move to live a better life in the universe. That's part of the equation. It's not just the pure discovery, it's also the applied. They go together. And there's been a wall that's been installed in the mind culturally to
Culturally.
sever the idea of thought from action, from matter, from spirit. And this has been done because, and again, when you read the writings of people like Max Planck, he opened up the door to the quantum world.
Yeah.
There's no differentiation. Great scientists don't think this way. They make discoveries because they don't see a dichotomy, an absolute dichotomy between the spirit side and the rational side. They see both as two sides of the same universe.
Of course, but
Yeah.
and also that fits a lot with the Eastern philosophy. And for you, because as far as I know, you're married with a Chinese woman, and
Yes.
you were very into the Chinese culture and Eastern culture. And we would talk about this in a little bit later. But you were talking about this manipulation of the cognitive. The perception of the masses. And
Yes.
but we were talking about
Who's
the
controlling?
Tavi was talk the Britons. But
Yeah.
for this matter, this is also important to mention the Hollywood, which is in the United
Oh yeah.
States, but the Sorbonne in France, the
Yeah.
68 movement, but also Germany, the Frankfurt School. So what is it's not a purely British thing.
No.
I mean, there's a lot of European um, um, uh, part takes part in all this mess. Yeah, the
Yeah. Yeah.
European.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Britain is as much of a victim. The British people and the British nation as a nation. And here I should say the English. Like the English people have been targeted just as much as the American people have been targeted. Um, the how do you say this? What we have is a continuous oligarchy. So over many generations, there is a continuous existence of a hereditary power which is not allied or rooted in any one particular nation state. It's something we could see, evidence of. It's obviously masquerading behind a variety of secret type of societies. So, I mean, some of this stuff, you're not going to get the type of hard smoking gun evidence we would like sometimes to see. Sometimes you get inferences. A JFK speech is an interesting one, calling out secret societies. But you have to sort of infer from a variety of evidence points. But these families, which maintain a hereditary social order, their idea, the thing that one of the ethical points that maintains their continuity is that you being born into the right family is itself the basis upon which you have the privileges that you enjoy to be the master over the many families who are born into poor families, who are born into slave situations because of an intrinsic inferiority inside of them caused by, whether it's the genetics or before the age of genetic theory, there was something in the blood, something just bad in their souls that made them destined to be enslaved. And that by itself is a disgusting, pathetic idea of social order, but it maintained itself for thousands of years. That was the dominant view of political philosophy
Yes,
for most
and
of human history.
it is racist, and also it is has a lot of pagan
Yes,
behind it,
yes, it
and
certainly.
completely anti-Christian to
Oh yeah,
for
yeah.
for the
And
fact, yeah.
yeah, like they'll sometimes the oligarchy will take the costume of Christianity to infiltrate and advance their objectives. But yeah, when you scratch the surface, you find, as we see today with this thing that's taken over the Vatican, something very pagan, which has no commitment to actual legitimate Christianity at whatsoever. And you find this in a variety. You find this in infiltrating Protestant networks, Catholic networks. It'll just infiltrate whatever it wants to, whatever it can, and it will use power. It will take over, kind of like a parasite takes over a host, and it will use physical power of its host. So it'll create organized crime networks that are often hierarchical, caste system based, as we had with the Brahmin system of India. When Britain went in, it was able to control and amplify the caste structure, right? Of a pyramidal like structure of elitism going all the way up to the Brahmins, the fairer skinned groups that were then ultimately under the control of British intelligence and British Freemasonic operations. And they'll use various Indian philosophies or perversions, interpretations of certain Indian religious philosophy in order to create a corrupt set of religious institutions, like the Kali Ma cult of assassins of India. This was actually made fun of by or popularized by the Indiana Jones movie, The Temple of Doom. But that was actually this is
Yeah.
something that was real. For millions of Indians died by this organized assassin cult, which had a lot of pedophilia. It had a certain relationship with very messed up gods like Kali, who had always portrayals of dead severed heads of her victims that they worship to and they sacrifice to. And they'll find different things like that they will incorporate and amplify while destroying the moral, reasonable expressions of a love of God in every culture that they come into contact with. And so you'll find beautiful, wonderful ideas expressed in the Vedas of a loving God that made us in his image, that wants us to do good and be instruments for goodness. That will be destroyed by the British or by their cult because they create cults and cults within cults. It's a cult
Hmm.
creation thing, right? And they will then use the power of the fifth column that they create, or in the case of like the USA after JFK, they create the fifth column that then takes over the host of the government as a virus will or as a parasite will. And then they'll use it as a martial lord. They will have the big beast do the work as the dumb giant, serving the interests of the actual brains, which are on the other side of the ocean. this goes back, and this is a technique that goes back to the ancient days of Babylon, when the Babylonian priesthood had used the cult of Marduk, which was sort of a proto-god for Zeus later on. But Marduk was the pre-Zeusian god, the god of gods in the pantheon. And the cult of Marduk was sort of the central command point that also controlled much of the financial resources of Babylon, of ancient Mesopotamia, that corrupted it, that turned its free, and here we're talking about a system that had originally a free farmer type of process, where you had the rights as a citizen early on to plant and grow your food. You had to just maintain your weapons so that if your nation had to defend itself, you were prepared to go to war. But increasingly, what you saw with Babylon was a corruption, where the free farmers became increasingly enslaved to an overlord class.
The feudalism that we were talking
it
before,
became
yeah.
feudalism, and that Marduk cult ended up at a certain point realizing that it would have more power by infiltrating and taking over a new opponent called Persia, but by within. And they ended up taking over control by a variety of techniques that, I mean, it's difficult to go through. And I mean, historians are only beginning to scratch at this a little bit. But what we do know is that Cyrus the Great, when he did go and invade Babylon, the head of Persia, and Persia took over Babylon, the first thing he did is he sacrificed to Marduk and gave honor and allegiance to the cult of Marduk. So Cyrus might have been good sometimes. I'm not saying he was a bad guy, but he turned Persia essentially over in many ways to become the marcher lord for the actual brains behind the operation of Babylon, in the same way that Britain took control of the U.S. and U.S. became its martial lord after World War II, and especially after the death of JFK and his brother. So it's a technique that's been an old technique, and again, it's a continuity of like you said, paganism, the destruction of the belief of truth, because in paganism, one of the reasons why it's so valuable as a structure is because if you believe in many gods and many points of causality to the universe, you believe thus in many truths. There's no one truth, because every god is perfect and every god is the cause of everything. So there's nothing that unifies anything around a universal. And so it's great. It's actually liberalism. You know, I am my gender. I am whatever I feel like today. If I feel like a banana, you can't say that I'm not a banana, or else you're committing a hate crime to me, because you're hurting my emotions and my personal feelings. So it's like that's the modern paganism under a secular veneer today.
There's a lot of relativism in this development. So these guys are pushing this relativism, moral relativism, everything,
And that's the
to
Frankfurt
make
School. That's the Frankfurt School.
Frankfurt, yes,
That's
and at the end they will. At the end, one will be everyone against everyone, because everyone has this. Everyone has their idea, and there is no reason, or there's no common values.
Yeah.
And this leads to slavery, sort of this feudalism that we are seeing throughout the history. But right now, we are seeing this being employed very concretely by the big tech, and all this control upon the speech and the freedom of speech. As you said, you are free to be everything until I don't like what you say. I mean,
Yeah,
this
exactly.
liberal, but you are in Canada, and Canada is being very famous to be a liberal society, and right now has a government which is from this gentleman Trudeau. And you had a kind of revolt late last year and the beginning this year with the truckers movement. How it is right now, the situation?
Well, I think the tension has been lifted a little bit, because I think those controlling Trudeau, his handlers, because he's not his own person. He's there's nothing really. It's a synthetic shell. There's nothing there. And it's important that people realize that he's not really worth your hate. It's kind of a pathetic character whose whole life has been handled, managed. He's been surrounded by flatterers, kind of like a low-level modern prince. Poor kid. Like, he never had his own life, and he's always been just in an echo chamber. So he's being used for propaganda purposes to put him, to basically advance an agenda that is run by the British oligarchy. And I say British because Canada is still a part of the British Commonwealth. It's still a monarchy. It's still run by the Privy Council. The Governor General is our head of state, and you have a coterie of a small network of Rhodes scholars like Chrystia Freeland, who is the Deputy Prime Minister, is one of his prime handlers, Oxford trained Rhodes Scholar, and Mark Carney is a key figure as well, who's another Oxford trained Crown agent who's installed to manage the perceptions and the policies of the government. Now, what unleashed in February of this year was indeed something that was much bigger than the British, the Anglo-Canadian oligarchy, let's call it that, expected. And there was, millions of people in Ottawa. I've never seen something like that. There was, what was important was that despite the efforts to turn it violent, there were provocations. There was evidence of various intelligence operations that had tried to bring Nazi symbology into the protests, that even tried to present rubble and rocks like they've done in Portland, Oregon, and across the USA in 2019 and 20. To try to provoke, to threaten the people, threaten to take their kids away, threaten to cut off their gas supplies in the winter. So there was efforts to create tension and then to make violence more likely and make it easy to do by having bricks and rocks just like laid about very easily for people to use. But amazingly, it was kept peaceful. People were able to film and photograph these efforts to create provocations on, at every moment. And all across Canada, where you had parallel freedom convoy protests and other things, it was always kept very peaceful. That's what made it work. And that's why the script that Justin Trudeau was given early on to call this whole faction of the population, deplorables, Nazis, misogynists, it didn't work because they couldn't get any data to justify what he was saying, but they couldn't stop his script. He just kept on going on overdrive, and they were even freezing bank accounts, and they even arrested people illegally using an Emergencies Act that never even passed into law. So what you had was a recalibration. The oligarchy sort of had to admit that they lost that battle. They pulled back a little bit. The different provinces lifted their mandates, which were very draconian. As of this week, there has been a lifting of the mandate to prevent people who are unjabbed from flying, which is now permitted for the moment until the next thing is set up. But of course, the next is the stage is being set for the next thing, right? You even have this week, it was announced by the government that we're no longer officially going to use the word fully vaxxed anymore. That's not going to be a word that's used. It will now be up to date. That will be the new norm, right?
Because you will never be fully vaccinated, because you never know when they come with the next.
Yeah. So I don't want to say anything that might get this. I know you want to put this on YouTube, so we have to be careful about the language we use.
Yeah, well.
But still, people I think know where we're going with this. And the other thing that the Canadian government did as well, I think everyone knows, is they legalized the purchase of any sort of handgun, the import or purchase or sale, which is, I think, the quickest we've ever seen this type of thing move in any Western country that I know of, at least. And there's bills currently being advanced as well to expand the definition of hate. And you see a lot of the rhetoric in the intelligence agency run media, official mainstream media outlets, the corporate media, to try to promote the idea that every Canadian has to be afraid of domestic terrorism, and that what happened in the US might happen here. We had a case of a young kid this week who we were told he shot his mom, and he wanted to go and take his array of weapons to go to drive from the West Coast to Ottawa to kill Justin, and this was stopped when he turned himself into the cops. It's a weird story, but this is being amplified as well to get people in a state where they're expected to think, well, yeah, we should have less rights, we should have less freedoms. We're all, even being a conspiracy theorist is supposedly something which we are being told is a sign that you're dealing with a domestic terrorist. If you lack trust in your government, this is what official State Department, U.S. State Department, as well as Canadian official documents have promoted and are being given to the media. That if your neighbor, if a friend is looking into conspiracy theories, or if they don't trust the government, then that's a sign that you might have to report them.
Expose how it was like Facebook had this expose the extremist and thing like that. Yeah. So they create this boogeyman, and but at the end they're going after everyone, the citizens. I mean,
Yeah, ultimately that's the objective, is to just go after anyone who has a disagreeable opinion. Again, it's the thought crime, and it goes back to the pagan thing. That's why the pagan structures of the Roman Empire were not congruent. They were not compatible with the new rise of Christianity, because Christianity recognized, and Judaism, frankly, got to recognized only one God, one creator, and didn't play along with this idea that we have to, have a plethora, a pantheon of different pagan cults that we worship to, that we're given license to by the Committee of 15, which runs the Roman selection committee that approves or disapproves of what cults and what gods are made into a cult that can then can collect taxes, can collect money revenue, and be sacrificed to in the pantheon. So in the world of bread and circuses, right, where people were just happy to watch for generations, Christians being fed to lions as part of the attack, and even synagogues. I mean, there's cases of hundreds of thousands of Jews who were burnt alive and killed, and synagogues destroyed over that course of that same period of time by the Roman Empire, that blamed the Christians for burning Rome, right? That's what Nero did as an inside job. And they were the domestic terrorists. The Roman citizens were told that it was the Christians who burnt Rome. And that's why you have to justify throwing them into the hungry lions and watching them, getting slaughtered by gladiators in matches. And people got sick of it after a century. They finally couldn't take it anymore, and they were shamed enough. I think even the pagans were shamed enough to realize that these Christians were having more dignity at the time of their death than they ever did in times of comfort, right? So this is what slowly allowed for Rome to crumble under its own immorality. And even though there were efforts to try to take over control of Christianity and imbue it with pagan ethics, people like St. Augustine were able to arise and who fought back against it, and were able to renew and a proper approach to a loving, like a true Christianity that was non-liberal. And this is what again arose with Dante Alighieri, what he tried to do and did do against the Black Wealth faction, during the 13th century as part of the war for the soul of Florence against the deep state of Florence. And this is what, people like Boccaccio, also allied with the Dante networks, was also waging war with and trying to renew and revive, and what finally revived in a strong way with the Golden Renaissance in the 15th century, that had at its core the idea that all people, regardless of your class, are born and made in the image of God. And as such, they all have the potential, if you give them the ability and the opportunity, they will all be able to express their God-given talents. And so you could have a Da Vinci who was not born necessarily of a high blood family. Maybe he was the bastard child of a noble, but I don't know that 100%. But point being is, they were training orphans to read and write and learn ancient Greek and translate in Latin and translate the classics. So these kids who would otherwise be like animals in a feudal society, these kids became the leaders of the next generation that ran things like the Brotherhood of the Common Life, the order of the different monasteries that trained orphans, that did good works, that taught also science and taught. Their objective was to create philosopher kings that could go and influence those who had political power. and even become those who had power. And this is where the idea of natural law, that a law is only good to the degree that it um, provides for, is based upon the consent of the governed. That idea first arose in the 15th century, and it took expression with the law systems, the reforms of Louis XI and Henry VII of England, of France, for the first time, where a king was seen as a king and you were seen as having authority only to the degree that you were a servant to your people and an instrument of God's will. You were not a master of the slaves, and that was a very different idea of king and leader than the oligarchical idea, of the Hobbesian idea of my right to power, my will to power is what defines my ability to lord over you, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's what the American Revolution came out of. Just to say quickly, like, that was the spirit of Ben Franklin. He was a Renaissance. He was not an Enlightenment thinker. Ben Franklin was a great statesman, but he was also the greatest scientist alive, which goes back to what I was saying about the cultural warfare at the beginning, that he did not see a difference between the ethical world of natural law that expressed itself in political change and economic change, because he was also an economist. And you could read his economic essays. They're fascinating, and they're premised on an idea that is based on the idea that money is not the source of value. Neither is desire to have pleasure. That's not the source of value. That's British economy. That's Adam Smith. That's Bentham. That's Mill. Ben Franklin is very clear that he's of the understanding that it is the power to do good and the power to create that is the source of value of everything else. That's what money has to abide by. And so his work on electricity in 1752, when he discovered the nature of electricity, it gave mankind a power. He then created hundreds of inventions with that new discovery that then created lightning rods, the ability to transmit messages, which came very soon afterwards using electric signaling. This transformed human beings' relationship to the universe, and also our relationship to ourselves, right? Like, what we are is very, because he was somebody who had a grade 3 education from the backwoods of the USA, and he was brought into Europe as, like, you know, this caveman, and the European elitist aristocrats couldn't understand how this guy did what none of them were able to do by making this, and they called him the Prometheus of America. And he was able to use this prestige and his natural charisma, and he's a hilarious guy, to organize the leadership of France, right? The best scientists, the best statesmen like Marquis de Lafayette later, and so many scientists like Jean-Sylvain Bailly and Lavoisier, and also the Russian leadership, Ekaterina Dashkova, who was the only female president of the Russian Academy of Sciences, who became the first member of Ben Franklin's Philosophical Society, and he became the first American who was the member of the Russian Academy of Sciences, and she's the one who organized the League of Armed Neutrality, so that Russia would lead in something that would facilitate arms and munitions and support to the U.S. cause when the rebels finally went into action under Ben Franklin's grand design. So this is all part of the same idea, right?
Yeah, but unfortunately or not, the history developed in a way that the United States has grown to a certain level, and then, like the Roman Empire, start falling in its own problems that development brings. Yes, and right now is a kind of a desert. They have still many very good things, but they are not for everyone. And right now they are the United States, the country, the United States, as military power. There's still the biggest economy in the world. Is also the image of has nothing too good to offer to the world, and now they are sending weapons, selling geopolitics, blocks against other rivals, like in the Pacific, like here in Europe, and in the Middle East. So, how do you see the new paradigm can come? Probably, I've read articles from you of the Eurasian Economic Union. and from this all this concept from Sergei Glaziev, and what is the Chinese are doing. How can this transition comes without a confrontation?
Well, I don't have all the answers to that.
Well,
I do. I because yeah, I mean we're in very uncharted territory at this point, and indeed, as you said, the United States has lost its what the Chinese would call the mandate of heaven, the Confucian term that which is very similar to the Renaissance idea as well, that a king only has the right to rule to the degree that his law is in conformity with God's law, natural law, and if you don't if that's lost, you lose the right to rule. That's embedded in the American, ironically, in the American Declaration of Independence. That the people are responsible to adhere to good laws and not bad laws, and if their government comes into communion with something which undermines their own welfare, then the people have the right to throw off said government and institute new government that would be better, that would serve better their interest in defense of the general welfare. So ironically, I mean, this is something which is a truth, which is whether east or west, it is true. And the irony of all of this is that Eurasia has increasingly become the expression of what was once an American, or that America once symbolized as far as a leader of promoting um,
development
growth,
and
yeah,
growth.
development, equal opportunity to grow for all, like JFK had tried to revive that better tradition. This is what we see coming out of the Belt and Road Initiative. And when you look at the way that China and its leading allies do business with poor countries, as well as how they negotiate their relationship with their own citizens, as far as a promise to have a better future for yourself than your kids did, that's very, very clear. There's I mean, China is committed right now to using state credit, state controlled banking to emit credit for big projects, and they're able to build better, higher quality, technologically advanced projects than anything we've ever seen in history. The Belt and Road Initiative has 140 plus nations. The BRICS now is soon going to have Argentina becoming a member. Maybe even Saudi Arabia might even be won over to that, because Saudi Arabia, as bad as they have been, they
Mhm.
they're realizing that they have no role to play in the great reset age of post-petroleum, post-oil society, which is a society based upon a depopulation agenda, where we are expected to, ideally willfully, I guess the oligarchy thinks, but if not willfully, then by force, reduce our quantity of bodies, and from being 8 billion down to something more manageable, like 1, maybe 2 billion, using, you know, things like the Green New Deal, the crappy quality of energy being promoted by the windmill, solar panel fixation, burning food for biofuel, shutting down all fossil fuel, or I shouldn't call it that. Let's call it hydrocarbon fuel sources, and especially shutting down all nuclear energy. Now, China, India, Russia, they're the majority of the world's nuclear energy is all being produced by them. China has already produced more nuclear energy in the past 6 years than we have produced in the past 60 years. And they have plans to like double that up by 2030. So what's more important is that they're not just keeping technology for themselves, they're providing the means for other countries in Africa, in South America, in Central America to access infrastructure investments, new tech, and also industrial manufacturing, which the IMF and the World Bank have always said no. You will right, to Africa. They have never had the right to have. Why don't they have, after 70 years of IMF World Bank loans, billions of dollars? Why is it to this very day that Africa has hardly any manufacturing? It's because the agenda, the intention was always just to give them money to pay for a corrupt criminal class that would manage the different regimes and maintain a favorable environment for Western cartels and mining companies to go in and rape the country while keeping the population starving, poor, and underpopulated,
And
or
wars and
in constant wars. Yeah, um, and that goes back hundreds of years. There's been an effort to erase Africa's ancient memory of its past grandeur. Same thing for, the entirety of Ibero-America. There's been an effort to erase their memory. India erase their memory and reconstruct a false memory, a false story, a false narrative for the people that puts them in a situation where they're always historically inferior to the more perfect light-skinned Aryans who invaded and subdued the dark-skinned people of India, or the same thing for Africa. It's spun in different ways, but always to inflame an inferiority complex in order for the people to be more willing to enslave themselves and to play by a game which is designed to kill them in this game of chess, right? And the only way to break out of this is to do what Ben Franklin did, or do what China is doing now. You can't play by the rules of the game. You have to play by a higher game made by, that's in conformity to the rules made by nature and nature's God. You can't play by the rules made by human wannabe gods. That's why they made the rules, so that they screw you over. Don't play by their rules. No.
So we might see in the near future this rule-based system, which led us until this point. And at this point, we have two scenarios of the Ukraine and the Pacific. The Taiwan might come to a problem also there. What is your what can you predict as and more about China than most of us in the channel? China has a different modus operandi about these kind of things. Maybe they won't do the same as in a special operation, but there is this constant provocation from the United States government around in all these countries using the AUKUS and the Quad and all there Japan. Probably it will be inevitable to have a confrontation also there because of Taiwan. Yeah. What is your idea about this?
Like Ukraine, Taiwan is very similar in how it's being used by the Western oligarchy. Now, China did just they cleared the use the non-war use of their army with a directive that has been passed recently, clearing the way for the possibility the use legally the use of a special military operation. It's possible that they may need to do what Russia did for you in regards to Ukraine. Possibly. It's looking like currently the U.S. Military industrial complex obviously is trying to use it as a provocation. They've boosted weapons supplies to weapons deals with Taiwan. They've boosted through the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, and a variety of other front groups. They've infiltrated the Taiwanese government over a long time, and have put in a radically separatist ideologue in the government, who is promoting not just separation, but also an alliance with the U.S. military-industrial complex, which is an absolute red line for China. Taiwan is recognized as a province of China within the Chinese constitution. Now, will that mean that they're forced to take action on a military level? Maybe. They certainly won't tolerate the U.S. installing nuclear weapons or anything like that, the way that Zelensky in Ukraine had given a speech, just a week before in Munich, saying that Ukraine should have nuclear weapons again, and we should go back to 1992. Now, in the case of both, the grand strategists are idiots. The ones trying to manage and control Ukraine. It's very clear right now that the perception managers who have tried to maintain this idea that Ukraine has won, has beaten back the aggressor Nazi like Putin, it's all bunk. Like, that's what most people might believe in the West who watch mainstream media, but the reality is Russia has completely turned the tables, and they're in a very dominant situation. The Kiev regime is in shambles. The population has no love in general for the Nazi movement, which is really a big, disgusting thing all over Ukraine in the West. So it's only a matter of time before the regime completely falls apart at this point, which is, it's not a question of if, but I think when. Poland is trying to take control of a chunk of Ukraine as well, which is weird. But the idea of getting Ukraine into NATO at this stage of the game is not likely. They also wanted to expand, NATO into Georgia, Finland, and Sweden. Finland and Sweden both applied. Turkey seems to be holding their ground, saying that they're just not going to let it happen. That seems to be also not part of the calculus. And as far as the NATO of the Pacific, the Quad, like India has made it clear that they have situated their destiny with Eurasia. We've seen India become part of the G8, the other G8, right? Not the G7, as an integral partner with Russia. They have increasingly seen that they need to work with Eurasia on a variety of points, not just oil purchases, but also building big projects, which they desperately need. And, their government, their Supreme Court, on an interesting point, even came out saying that it cannot be forced. There's no jabs for any reason that can be forced upon the bodily autonomy of the people of India. That's the first time I think I've seen a Supreme Court come out with such a firm stance, which runs contrary to the rules-based orderistas as far as how they want to reorganize all of society. So India, I don't think, is going to be a very overall reliable partner in this Quad. South Korea has been a colony of the military-industrial complex of the U.S. since the 1950s. The U.S. never really left after the Korean War, so they still have 26,000 U.S. Troops stationed there. They have biolabs as well called Centaur and Jupiter that were set up by Obama in 2010 that are very active in South Korea.
But Japan is playing an important role for this project.
Yeah. Japan is a bit more of a basket case. Their former, there's something like 50,000 U.S. troops stationed in Japan. That's a big deal. Japan is also a U.S. military colony, and they have been since we bombed
since the end of the war. Yeah, like Germany
with nuclear, or Hiroshima and Nagasaki with nuclear weapons. So there's been obviously a tendency to try to keep ideologues in power. Shinzo Abe was the previous head of their government, and he recently has been he's running a political party of Japan, Nippon Party, anyway, which actually is pro-fascist. They honor their fascist Nazi collaborator grandparents, and in their view of their party constitution, Japan is completely innocent of all wrongs in World War II. They were justified in everything, and that was a point of greatness in their mind. Despite the role of the 10 million, or the Japanese in killing 10 million Chinese and doing experiments with Hirohito on 500,000 or so POWs on biological warfare operations that were then absorbed by the U.S. military. And Hiroishi got a job in Fort Detrick, managing the new bioterror facilities of the entire Cold War. So Japan Shinzo Abe called for hosting nuclear weapons as well in Japan. He recently just championed the U.S. going in militarily to supporting Taiwan if the Chinese should go and take it over. Biden is a rambling idiot, but he still went off script and said, we fully will back up Taiwan in a fight against China if China makes a move to invade. It's a really, I think they're out of control. They're not. They want to believe that they're gods that can impose their will onto reality, and reality will simply conform. But I think that reality has shown that it is a very different. It's animated by something very different that the oligarchy can't control, and they do have
dangerous. Yeah,
they're very dangerous.
It's very dangerous, and but to finish, because of the time and everything, how does it? How can people understand that this is not actually the West or us against them, or the West against the East, but it is a matter of two kinds of paradigms that do not fit anymore. And actually, we are on the wrong side because this
Yeah,
paradigm doesn't benefit us neither. The ones from the middle to down, we don't profit from this system anymore.
no,
So that is better to join different alternatives for common good. Yeah.
yeah.
How can you, because you have a very good experience on this and about this Eastern paradigm and what is going on there. But we are in a point that it might have a confrontation. At least it seems
It might.
to. And
Um, yeah.
how can we
Well,
avoid that? And yeah,
I mean, we definitely need to have citizens who understand that it is what is needed is not simply fighting for your personal autonomy. That is not adequate at this stage of the game. You need to have a positive idea of what are you going to do. We do have an oncoming collapse of the banking system. It's a controlled demolition. It's being accelerated by a breakdown of the physical economy, the destruction of food supplies, reliable forms of energy. That's being consciously destroyed so that people will think that they have to adapt to scarcity, to a system that is intrinsically scarce. Um, which means lower your expectations for having a long life expectancy or eating 3 times a day or eating meat and not eating bugs, or dying without euthanasia, forced or willful. It doesn't matter, right? And meanwhile, maybe we can give you drugs and video games in a metaverse experience while you wait for your euthanasia pill or something. So, I mean, that's a very dismal, dystopic reality, but it's something that is a possibility right now, a
it's
likely one.
already in
It's already,
Canada. The state in Canada even says to the population, "Look, is it for free? You can we can apply euthanasia." That this came in
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
in the
You're feeling,
news
yeah,
last month.
you're feeling depressed. You don't have a mortal disease, but you're just feeling depressed. It's okay. We can help you. And then, we're going to save money on the healthcare system because you won't be such a burden anyway. And, we'll have less of a carbon footprint as well. Bonus. And you'll be happier too because you'll be dead and you won't be sad anymore. So it's it's absurd. And yeah, but I mean that's what we obviously see as a consequence of this sick line of assumptions that are at the heart of the logic of the rules based Great Reset order. Um, People have to realize that we simply reacting to that ugly 1984 situation is not adequate. You have to have in your mind a sense of what is possible as far as the powers of the nation state. I just had a confrontation with a figure named, not a confrontation. I asked him a question. It was polite. Named Maxime Bernier, who is the head of the People's Party of Canada. It's one of these anti-Great Reset political parties. Overall, I support it, but I spoke to him at the end of a town hall event. There's a video, and I asked them, like, with the oncoming collapse, what do you believe is the role? Do you believe that the Canadian government could possibly? We know that it could play a negative role. That government power can be used for bad. Could it also be used for good, possibly, if it's run by leadership that cares, to defend people from the collapse and do things like reinstate Glass-Steagall, the Canadian version of it that forced the separation between the speculative banking and normal clean banking. This is something that can be done so that the bankers take their losses and we defend people's jobs and savings and their lives. And my friend also asked a follow-up question on the Bank of Canada. Does he believe that we could use it as an instrument to do good the way China does to build its big infrastructure projects and the way we used to do in the 1950s and 60s when we built all of our infrastructure? We stopped doing these things 60 years ago. But does he see a role of the both positively and negatively? His answer was no. Essentially, the role of government is to do nothing when it comes to an economic crisis, is to just let the crisis happen. And he said it's going to be very painful. You should make your own food, try to buy real estate. And I mean, this is a rich guy telling poor people, go buy real estate. Like, what? Sure, buy gold. okay, fine. Try to like for tomorrow's food for my kid. Like, yeah, thank you. Um, and he said, I believe that we will have an emergent new system if we all just believe with cryptos and blockchain and gold, and we'll just arise magically. And we just government should do nothing. And as far as Bank of Canada was concerned, absolutely not. It should just be laissez-faire everything. Now, this is ultimately, I think that these are good people, but ideologically they've been screwed up by their British economy that has promoted this idea that there is such a thing as invisible hands that
The
mystically
invisible hand.
magically organize the marketplace when you let the marketplace just be and destroy governments or get rid of government influence. Now, I mean, the reality is governments were created by us to defend ourselves
Yeah,
against the
exactly.
oligarchy. That's why we created governments that are sovereign. That's why the oligarchy wants to destroy sovereign governments, sovereign nation states, to create a one
Mhm.
world government. So why not use this instrument that we have available to us to do battle with the oligarchy, which we can do and has been done so many times in our past in Europe and North America. And it is being done right now by Russia, by China, by India. They're using the power of the sovereign nation state to do things that defend people and their nation state and their culture from this evil satanic force. So, if you're going to be an activist, have that in your mind, whatever country you're in. And if you're running for office, if you're in a political party right now, if you have some form of political power, you have to recognize that there are things that have to be done if we're going to get through the storm. Glass-Steagall, doesn't matter what country you're in, you need to break up the banks fast and contain the demolition, which is going to happen. The question is, are we going to be in the building when the controlled demolition happens and it goes down? Or are we going to make sure that it's only the bankers? And then, we got 50, 60 years of self-induced decay. We've not maintained our infrastructure. We've shut down all of the investments we used to do in building big infrastructure projects. We stopped it all. So we need to revive that the way China does when they got 40,000 kilometers of high-speed rail. They built it up in 20 years. We got zero in Canada. The US has zero practically. Europe has a bit, but not very much. So we need to do these things. And so I see evidence that there are movements within the governments that are captured. I still see a better part of the Republican Party in the USA. There's bad Republicans who are the sort of Liz Cheney, Dick Cheney neocon variety.
Whew.
And
A
then
lot.
there's a lot of, but then there's also a lot of people who are actual nationalist patriots who originally broke the Hillary Clinton game, got the Trump card played, and there's still an active force that is viable. It's confused, it's misinformed, but it's the only thing inside of the USA, that movement, that has any viability to breaking the US out of its current trajectory, which is total destruction. It's a bad trajectory. There's like you've yeah, it would be a nuclear war if this thing follows through. If Russia and China do not willfully submit to a one world government out of intimidation and the threat of launching a nuclear war, that nuclear war, I believe, will be launched as a last ditch scenario. So I think that people have to just get more educated faster, get wiser faster, make better have more wisdom defining your actions. Because a lot of people they go into action mode too soon, and they don't take the time to study history, study what is your enemy? Is your enemy China and Russia? Most conservatives right now who don't like the Great Reset, they think Russia or China or both are their actual enemy. They don't understand how the British are actually still, and I mean the British oligarchy, right? The old nobility that is taking over so much of Europe as well. That's still at the
Yeah,
center of the evil pus. They don't get that.
they
So
don't get that.
yeah.
Ah, and there's a poof. Well, this is a long. So maybe we will have another chances to talk about these
Sure.
issues. I'm sorry that I have these also diffused topics. I'll promise next time it will be more organized so I can um, make very focused questions
Hey, this is
to
good.
also very concrete and uh, yes, but was our first interview in
Yeah.
English. Was Matthew Ehret, a very important author from Canada with prolific knowledge that we could stay here 2 or 3 hours, but would be very difficult for me to translate and to upload and everything that requires afterwards. Thank you, Ehret, Matthew. And I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add.
No, this was fun, and I'm honored that I could be your first inaugural English broadcast. That's great, and if people are listening and they read English, I've I just published with my wife. We co-authored a new trilogy of books called "The Clash of the Two Americas," Volume 1, 2, and 3. The newest one has a photograph of Ben Franklin and the Belt and Road Initiative, with Ben Franklin looking at you in a cheeky way. And it's called the Birth of a Eurasian Manifest Destiny. And so those are
Interesting.
things that people can pick up on my website if they go to canadianpatriot.org, or just go to Amazon or something. It's evil, but it makes it easy to sell books. They could do that.
Yes, I will put the links here down below to people.
Awesome.
Okay, thank you, Matthew.
All right. Thank you, Ricardo. It's a pleasure.
Cheers.
Bye.